Hi everybody, this is Craig Teener for The Mindful Eye and the Daily Critique. Today's image was submitted by Julie, who's an intermediate photographer. Julie shot this image with a Canon G9 and the exposure information is ISO 100, f2.8 and 1/5 of a second. Julie submitted this image for the Mindful Eyes community assignment, and the concept was stranger. The idea was to approach somebody that you didn't know and make an impromptu portrait of that person. I want to talk more about the concept of the assignment in just a second. I want to mention the technical data here. Julie shot this wide open on this lens. One thing about a point and shoot where the sensors are a little bit smaller, even shooting wide open a lot of times because of the size of the sensor, there's such a great implication of depth of field. It can be hard to sort of create a feeling of shallow depth of field. The ISO was 100 here and the shutter speed was 1/5 of a second, unless I was intentionally wanting to do something with implied motion blurring. This is a situation where I probably would have turned the ISO up to 400 or 800, turn it up 2 or 3 stops where we could get to a faster shutter speed for hand holding, maybe get up to a 30th or 50th or 60th of a second. Just wanted to mention that from a technical standpoint and make that go away. And let's talk about the concept of the assignment here. Again, the idea was to approach somebody that you didn't know and make a portrait of them. Julie says this was somebody that she met at a Photoshop seminar, and we're coming up on the new year. If I could encourage every photographer that crosses my path when I'm teaching to do one thing in the new year, it would be to carry your camera with you as much as possible, and on days when you're able to carry your camera, to make a commitment, if you're not already doing this, to approach at least one person that you don't know that you find to be interesting in some kind of way, so you're genuinely interested in the person, and approach them and ask them if you can take their picture. I'd encourage you to do that for 2 simple reasons. Number one, the reality in my teaching for the last 4 years is I created a workshop to help photographers go past limits or fears, and in teaching that workshop now a dozen times and having about 130 photographers participate in those workshops, 90% of the people that have taken the Next Step Creativity workshops have identified walking up to a stranger with their camera or having to photograph a stranger with their camera as the number one fear. So this is the biggest fear. It's a big enough sample now where I would probably be able to safely say that this would be, if you could ask all the photographers in the world what their biggest fear is, that I could probably safely say that this one would be somewhere very near the top. So this is a fear for a lot of people, and going past a fear can really help us in terms of just having more inner strength and coming from a place of having more confidence. You might think, well, Craig, if that's all there is to it, then I'll build confidence in another way. This is just something that's uncomfortable for me and I don't want to do it. There's quite a bit more to it than that. The second part to me is the most powerful part. The reality of taking pictures or making anything is that it's a form of communication. I joke about this, but in some ways I'm serious. In my whole life, I've never met a photographer that took pictures and then guarded them by putting them away somewhere. People share their pictures. I've not met anybody that takes their pictures and locks them away so that they can be safe. It's a form of communication. I've met lots of people when they're getting feedback that they don't like say that they don't care about feedback. I've not really ever met anybody that didn't care about feedback. I've met a lot of egomaniacs, and I read a lot of things that people write online that are egomaniacal. I should have said that another way. We're all egomaniacs at one time or another. People are cycling in and out of different ways of being. But I've seen a lot of people really caught up in their ego, myself included. And when feedback comes around that we don't like, then we can say, well, that we just don't care. But that's almost always a form of self-protection. Most photographers, is an incredible understatement that I know, are interested in photography as a form of communicating with other people, and they're very interested in the feedback that they get about their work, whether they like it or not. Why am I going down this road and talking about this today? Essentially what we're trying to do in our life is build community. That's what our life is about. Almost anybody would tell you that at the end of their life, if they ever felt like their life was ending, that the things that mattered were relationships and connections to other people. Ultimately, those types of experiences and feelings are all that we're left with at the end of the day. And To me, photography, like any other art form, is about community. When people collect the work of a photographer, they're not so much collecting photographs, or when people hire photographers, or when people appreciate your blog over time. It's not so much that they're appreciating photographs, it's that they're appreciating something that's much bigger that surrounds the photographs, the person and the photographs. It's about connection, and it's about community. And I don't know of a better way to build community for your work as a photographer than to introduce yourself to people and take their picture. You may be shocked if you just did this for a month, all of the amazing things that would happen in your life. Building confidence, making friends, if you want to do commercial work, finding clients that will hire you, so on and so forth. There's no end to it. I can easily say in the last 4 years that the best things that have happened to me in my life, hands down, nothing else even comes close, have come out of these encounters that I've had with people that started out as strangers, and I took their picture, sometimes thinking I'd never see him again, and I did see him again, and it ended up leading to something that was incredible. And I have this belief about life. I believe that when we boldly move forward towards the things that we care about, that something magical happens, that we connect to something that's much bigger than we are automatically right away. And I know I'm coming on strong with that, but it's maybe the most important thing that I have to say at this point. Then there's something very, very simple that I want to say about this photograph, in addition to Julie's courage to do this kind of work and to open herself up to some amazing possibilities. And that is the bulk of the information. Now we're going to go very technical. We're going to go in a very different direction. Kind of hard to make this change, but let's try to do it anyway. Here's our histogram, and the bulk of the information that is contained within these 256 levels of luminance, starting at 0 over here and going over to 255 right over here on the edge. Bulk of the information, the depth of the information, is up here in the brightest pixels. When we used to shoot on slide film, a lot of times we would underexpose to get a richer shot or a more dramatic shot. If you're shooting digital, and from a technical standpoint, Julie has correctly exposed the file. She has pushed the brightest pixels as far as she can to the right, and that means that this file is going to be easy to edit. The tough part about this is one of the easiest ways to take a subject and start to push it towards something that's more extraordinary is to underexpose, because when we underexpose, we start to simplify. We have less information. We start to call attention to the areas that have light. It's more cinematic, and so much of the time it's one of the easiest ways to simplify a photograph. But if we do that in camera with a digital camera and end up with a histogram that looks like this, if we decide later to change this or edit it and make pixels much brighter, then we'll run into trouble. So technically this is exposed great, but this is a classic example of a photograph that when I look at it I immediately think, this would be so much more powerful 3 or 4 stops darker, because the expression is dramatic and heavy. The camera angle is dramatic, low to high. This has a big psychological impact on us. When we see these shots where the camera is very low and the person is towering over us, the arms crossed lead to more of a feeling of kind of heaviness. The hands on a wall that has texture and lines that push down creates more of a feeling of mass pushing down. And if this gets darker up here, all of that will too. This image can start to, at one time, become much more of a psychologically interesting image for the viewer and be visually simpered by just darkening that one thing. Go to adjustments. Just really encourage you in the same way I would encourage you to photograph strangers, to just do this one thing to all of your pictures. In your image editing program, dramatically brighten and dramatically darken, and see what you think. And this is a classic example of an image where I'm going to pull from a little bit different place on the curve and just darken this all the way down dramatically. Now I have a little hint of a detail that is really beautiful, simple negative space that plays off of this triangular negative space shape down here, 2 textures that are different. I basically now have sort of 3 zones in the image. There's a nice catch light in the portrait subject's eye over here. We could open that back up a little bit, but it's really interesting to see that catch light in the shaded side of the face. So the lighting, once we go darker, makes the face and the expression so much more interesting, makes this hand a lot more interesting, in the composition. Now that I've darkened it, I do wish we could see a little bit more of the hand over here, sort of enforce the symmetry and just kind of the direct part of everything kind of coming right at us. Love the Dutch angle here and what that's doing, major movement on this diagonal. Just one more time, look at what just simple darkening, that's it, just pulling down from one place on the curve has done for this image. Love to hear your feedback about the critique today. Massive thank you to Julie for having the courage to do this kind of work and for sharing such a great portrait with us on the Mindful Eyes Daily Critique, and hope to see you again real soon on the Mindful Eye.